Your four favorites are La La Land, Eyes Wide Shut, Aftersun, and Chungking Express. At first glance, if I had to pick just one movie to recommend to you, it would be Make Way for Tomorrow, because the combination of La La Land and Aftersun makes me think you like movies that'll leave you emotionally shattered. And as Orson Welles once said, this movie would make a stone cry. And this movie has romance like La La Land and depicts adults reflecting on the relationship they had with their parents like Aftersun. Speaking of movies directed by Leo McCarey, one of the first films that popped into my head was An Affair to Remember, because like La La Land, it's a romance film with an ending that'll probably leave you in tears, and it's comparable to Chungking Express in the sense that there's this feeling of waiting for someone or loving someone from afar, because in Chungking Express, one of the characters is hoping to hear from his ex before May 1st, and the boarding pass that Faye makes is dated 1 year later, and in An Affair to Remember, a lot of the story hinges on the characters planning to meet up on July 1st. Speaking of movies starring Cary Grant, one of the first films I thought of was Bringing Up Baby. Mia mentions this movie in La La Land, and the beginning of her relationship with Sebastian kind of reminds me of this movie because of the way they keep running into each other and have a bit of animosity towards each other. Like Eyes Wide Shut, it's about a man who ends up being thrown out of his comfort zone because of a woman. Because in Eyes Wide Shut, Bill's life spirals out of control after his wife admits to fantasizing about other men, and in Bringing Up Baby, the protagonist's life turns into chaos when he meets Katharine Hepburn's character, Susan. And Susan's personality kind of reminds me of Faye in Chungking Express. But if I wanted to connect one movie to all four of your favorites, I'd go with Millennium Mambo. It's a romance film with great music like La La Land. Like Eyes Wide Shut, it has a hazy, dreamlike vibe. It follows a person reflecting on past memories like Aftersun, and has a visual style reminiscent of Chungking Express. Long Day's Journey into Night, like La La Land, is about love and has a feeling of nostalgia to it. It's a mystery with a dreamlike, hazy atmosphere like Eyes Wide Shut. It's about memory and loss like Aftersun. And like Chungking Express, it's about longing and has gorgeous cinematography. Speaking of movies with the words Long Day in the title, The Long Day Closes is an LGBTQ coming-of-age film like Aftersun, and there's a deep love for movies that can be felt throughout La La Land, and the protagonist of this film finds a great deal of comfort in movies. A short film about love is a romance film where the timing or circumstances aren't quite right, like La La Land. Like Eyes Wide Shut, it explores ideas about sex, love, and voyeurism. It's got a feeling of loneliness and trying to better understand what someone's going through, like Aftersun. And like Chungking Express, it's about romantic infatuation and longing for connection. But a short film about love is the expanded version of Decalogue 6, and that's my favorite part of Decalogue, so I'm always going to recommend both. There are two movies that haven't been released yet that I want to make sure are on your radar. The first is Fly Me to the Moon, which is set in Hong Kong like Chungking Express and is a semi-autobiographical depiction of a father-daughter relationship like Aftersun. And Omaha, which reminds me a lot of Aftersun. You didn't have Guy and Madeline on a park bench marked as watch, which like La La Land is another romantic musical from Damien Chazelle. Plus there are a few visual similarities and a reference to this film in La La Land. Speaking of movies with characters named Guy, that's the name of Tom Everett Scott's character in That Thing You Do, which is also a musical like La La Land. And Guy loves jazz, and in La La Land there's a scene where Tom Everett Scott's character brings Mia to a jazz club, and that isn't just a coincidence. Damien Chazelle is a big fan of That Thing You Do. Speaking of movies that are referenced in La La Land that you didn't have marked as watch, you might also want to check out Rebel Without a Cause, An American in Paris, Funny Face, Meet Me in St. Louis, Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, Jules and Jim, West Side Story, and The Red Balloon. A few other romantic musicals I think you might like are Once, The Last 5 Years, and Moulin Rouge. Under the Silver Lake is one of my go-to recommendations for fans of Eyes Wide Shut, but I also think you'd like The Trial because Eyes Wide Shut is sort of Kafka-esque. If you're more interested in Tom Cruise's character in Eyes Wide Shut, then I think you might enjoy Blow Up. But if you're more interested in Nicole Kidman's character, then I think you might enjoy Belle de Jour. Scrapper is one of my go-to recommendations for fans of Aftersun for its moving depiction of a father-daughter relationship. But I also think you should check out Monster for the way it captures the emotional distance between parent and child and explores how memories and different perspectives influence our ability to understand the people we love. I want to throw in one more recommendation, and since it feels like there's a lot of loneliness, longing, and exploration of the complexities of human relationships and connections throughout your favorites, I think you might appreciate What Happened Was.